It is February 2015. In Dublin, an astrophysicist opens an email. It tells him he is one of 100 people shortlisted to leave Earth forever. The destination is Mars. The trip is one way. There is no plan to ever bring him home. More than 200,000 people, he is told, wanted this seat. He is one of the chosen few. It is the proudest moment of his life. Within weeks, that same man will do something no other finalist dares to do. He will start pulling the whole thing apart from the inside. Because almost nothing he had been told was true. Not the science, not the money, and it turns out, not even the 200,000. This is the story of Mars 1, the mission that sold the whole world a one-way ticket to another planet and then quietly went bankrupt for less than the price of a house. You're watching Mindwired. Mars 1. Chapter 1, The Man Who Sold Mars. To understand how so many smart people believe this, you have to start with the man selling it. And he was not a crank. His name is Bas Lansdorp, a Dutch engineer trained at 20 in Delft, who spent years chasing a wild idea in wind power, generating electricity from kites on a tether. It worked well enough to build a real company, Ampix Power, and in 2011, Lansdorp sold his stake in it to fund something far bigger. He was not alone. His co-founder was Arno Wielders, a physicist who had actually worked on spacecraft for the European Space Agency. This was not two kids with a website. And the vision was intoxicating. Not a flag and a footprint, not a short visit, a permanent, growing human settlement on another world in our own lifetime. Science fiction, finally with a launch date. In 2012, they announced it to the world. A permanent human colony on Mars. The first crew of 4 would land in 2023. And the plan was staged and specific. A robotic scout first, then supplies and habitats waiting on the surface. And only then, 4 humans. On paper, it read like a real space program with a real schedule. And here was the idea that made it sound possible. The reason no one had colonized Mars, Lansdorp argued, was the trip home. Building a rocket that can lift off from the surface of Mars is brutally hard and brutally expensive. So Lansdorp's answer was simple and chilling. Don't come back. Cut the return trip, and suddenly the mission fits inside technology that already exists. Also, the pitch went. Mars 1, Lansdorp said, would not even build the hardware. It would be an integrator, buying proven parts from the giants, from SpaceX, from Lockheed Martin, from Paragon. And the timing felt perfect. This was the dawn of the private space age. If a company like SpaceX could land its rockets upright, why couldn't a bold enough startup land people? The impossible suddenly felt overdue. It even paid real aerospace firms for real concept studies. On paper, it looked less like a fantasy and more like a startup. Mars 1 was suddenly everywhere. CNN, the BBC, TED stages, magazine covers. For a while, it genuinely felt like watching the future being born, live, in front of us. Chapter 2, A Ticket to the Stars. But a Mars colony costs billions. Lansdorp estimated $6 billion just for the first crew. So where does a small Dutch foundation find $6 billion? Lansdorp had 2 answers. The first was ordinary, investors. The second was radical, and it was the one that made headlines around the world. The answer was the most audacious part of the whole plan. They would televise it. The selection, the training, the landing, a global reality show about the first humans on another world. Think of the Olympics, Lansdorp said. Billions of people watch. The broadcast rights alone could pay for the mission. It was the single most watched event in human history, waiting to happen. Lansdorp put numbers on it that were almost hard to say out loud. Broadcasting the mission, he claimed, could eventually bring in as much as $45 billion. Enough, on paper, to pay for everything many times over. To prove it was real, in December 2013, Mars 1 asked the public directly. A crowdfunding campaign for a robotic scout mission by 2018. It raised about $400,000. That scout never flew. It hired real names, too. Lockheed Martin paid to study a Mars lander. Paragon to study life support. They were only paper studies, but they bought Mars One something priceless: credibility. And to get the cast, in April 2013, Mars One did something extraordinary. It opened applications to the entire human race. Anyone could apply to leave Earth forever. The response was staggering. In the first 2 weeks alone, Mars One said 78,000 people had applied from more than 120 countries. By the time it was over, the number Mars One gave the press was the one that went around the world. More than 200,000 people, it said, wanted a one-way ticket to Mars. And the media loved it. A one-way ticket to Mars was an irresistible story, and almost no one paused to check the arithmetic behind it. The number became a fact simply by being repeated. And these were not all thrill seekers. They were doctors, teachers, engineers, people who told their husbands and wives and children that they were training to leave the planet and never come back. Take Sonia Van Meter, a political consultant in Texas, married with 2 young stepsons. She applied for a one-way seat, and she meant it. Her family began, slowly, to prepare for a goodbye with no return. Others wrote open essays with titles like "Why I Am Volunteering to Die on Mars." These were not gullible fools. They were sincere, credentialed people, rebuilding their whole identities around a single promise. In February 2015, Mars One narrowed the field to its final 100. 50 men, 50 women from around the world. They called them the Mars 100. Among the 100 were a British astrophysicist, an Australian sustainability researcher, a physics PhD student. Ordinary, brilliant people who had quietly decided that Mars was worth dying for. One of them was the astrophysicist in Dublin. His name is Joseph Roche, and unlike almost everyone else, he had the training to actually check the claims he was being sold. What he found would take the whole dream apart. It started with a single, simple question. How many people had really applied? Chapter 3, the number. 200,000 applicants. It was in every headline. Time magazine, CNN, the BBC. Nobody stopped to ask what the word applicant actually meant. Because the 200,000 were not applicants. They were people who had left an email address on a website. That was it. Mars One's own chief medical officer explained the gap this way. There were hurdles, he said, and the very first hurdle was a payment, a small administration fee. A real application meant something completely different. You had to pay a fee, film a video, submit a medical statement, and answer a questionnaire. Almost nobody did. By the close of applications, the number who had actually paid and submitted a video was not 200,000. According to NBC News, it was 2,782. That is not a rounding error. That is the difference between a global phenomenon and a crowd that would not fill a small theatre. The headline was off by 99%. And inside Mars One, even the numbers disagreed with each other. Its own chief medical officer told The Guardian he had seen around 80,000 applications. 200,000, 80,000, a few thousand. Not one figure matched the next. When the criticism grew, Mars One quietly updated its own website. The true number of completed applications, it now admitted, was 4,227. Still barely 2% of the number it had sold to the world. And even 4,000 was only Mars One's own count. As the journalist Elmo Keat put it, we do not know that 4,000 is any more real than 200,000. It is simply what they are telling us. And why did so few people finish? Because of the very first hurdle. To apply, you had to pay. The application fee was not flat. It was tiered by the wealth of your country. As little as $5 in the poorest nations, $38 in the United States, up to $73 in the richest. Mars One framed this as fairness, making the dream affordable everywhere. Its critics saw something else, a dream that turned every hopeful into a paying customer. How much did the fees raise? We do not know. Lansdorp never disclosed it, and no audited accounts were ever published. But the strangest part was not the money coming in. It was how you climbed the list once you were in. Chapter 4, Points. This is where Joseph Roche stopped being a finalist and started being a whistleblower. Because the deeper he got, the less the selection looked like a space program. In March 2015, Roche went on the record with the journalist Elmo Keep in an investigation for Medium. What he described was not a rigorous astronaut search. By Roche's account, his entire vetting to become one of the first humans on Mars came down to this: a questionnaire, a video, a medical exam he arranged with his own doctor, and a single 10-minute call over Skype. The selection was supposed to have far more: group challenges, isolation tests, a real televised astronaut trial, but round after round was quietly postponed or cancelled or simply never arranged. There was no in-person interview. The multi-day regional round he had been promised was quietly cancelled. In his words, it was, quote, just not enough information to make a judgment on someone about anything. Then came the part that alarmed him most. Every candidate sat on a public leaderboard, ranked by points. And Roche said there was really only one way to earn more of them. You could buy Mars One merchandise. You could donate money. According to Roche, the more you gave, the higher you climbed. The list of the most likely people to go to Mars looked, to him, a lot like a list of the biggest donors. When The Guardian published a list of the top 10 most likely Mars One hopefuls, Roche said the ranking was, in large part, a ranking of who had donated the most. The public faces of the mission were, quietly, its biggest givers. Watching all of this, some writers reached for a very different comparison. Not a space agency at all. Something closer to a multi-level marketing scheme wearing the costume of exploration. And Roche said that when reporters paid finalists for interviews, Mars One asked the candidates to donate 75% of that fee straight back to the organization. And everyone who applied had been automatically enrolled in what Mars One called its community and handed points. The entire hopeful crowd had quietly become an audience, one that could be sold to and sold things. This is the moment to be careful and fair. These are Roche's allegations, reported by one journalist. They are not a court's findings, and Bas Lansdorp rejected them flatly. Donations, Lansdorp said, had nothing to do with who was selected. Many candidates who gave money did not advance. Many who gave nothing did. To suggest otherwise, he said, was, quote, simply a lie. Mars One also insisted its screening was serious, with checks it said was similar to NASA's own. But when Elmo Keep pressed for specifics, who sat on the committee, where the tests happened, how long they took, she reported that the answers simply never came. So we are left with a dispute, not a verdict. A respected scientist on one side, a sincere founder on the other. But Roche was about to be joined by 5 engineers who did not deal in opinions. They dealt in numbers. Chapter 5, 68 days. In 2014, a team of engineers at MIT did something no journalist could. They took Mars One's own plan, fed it into a life support simulation, and asked a single question. Would the colonists survive? They did not guess. They built their simulation on the only closed habitat humans have ever actually run for real, the International Space Station. And even with that as the starting point, the colony died. This is that study, an independent assessment by 5 MIT engineers of whether human beings could actually survive Mars One's colony. Its verdict was brutal. As designed, the mission would kill its own crew. But here is the cruel twist. The first settler would not die from running out of oxygen. They would die from too much of it. To feed the crew, Mars One planned to grow crops inside the habitat. But those plants breathe out oxygen. In a sealed base, oxygen would build and build until the air itself became a fire hazard. It began with food. Mars One planned about 50 square meters of crops. MIT calculated you would need closer to 200 just to keep the crew alive, and more plants meant more oxygen and a far bigger problem. There was no technology in the plan to pull that extra oxygen out, so the only fix was to vent the air and replace it with nitrogen, except the nitrogen would run out. And once it did, every attempt to control the oxygen would bleed away the atmosphere itself. The pressure would fall, and around day 68, the crew would suffocate, not in a disaster. On schedule. Because Mars One's central promise had always been this. No new major developments or inventions are needed, its plan said. Only existing, validated, available technology. MIT checked that claim, system by system, and found several of those technologies did not yet exist at the level required. And suffocation was only the beginning. The logistics were just as impossible. To land the gear for the first cruise, MIT calculated you would need 10 to 14 of the largest rockets on Earth for the setup alone. Mars One had planned for 6. And because nothing ever comes back, the spare parts pile up, mission after mission. MIT projected that after a couple of decades on the surface, spare parts alone would make up more than half of everything shipped from Earth. The colony would spend itself just staying alive. And the bill only grew. By the time you were resupplying just the 3rd crew, MIT estimated you would need up to 24 heavy launches at a cost of over $7 billion for a single resupply run, and then it would climb again. Lansdorp fought back hard. The study, he said, made wrong assumptions and had, quote, nothing to do with our mission. Oxygen removal, he insisted, already existed in hospitals. It just needed testing in space. He offered his own competing numbers. He could do it, he said, for $1.6 billion using 13 launches, not 15. But on one point, even he gave ground. His $6 billion price tag, he admitted, was probably too low. But then came a public debate in August 2015, where the two sides finally met. And something remarkable happened. They agreed. And at that debate, Mars One's own technical partner, from the very company it had hired to study its life support, sat across from the MIT team and conceded. Their analysis, he agreed, was essentially correct. Mars One's own technical partner conceded the MIT analysis was largely correct. And Lansdorp himself admitted that the specific plan to land humans by 2027 was, in his words, mostly fiction. And then he did something stranger still. He reframed the study that predicted his colonists suffocating as support for his plan. I actually consider it, he said, a confirmation of Mars One. The goal, he insisted, had always been sincere, even when the plan was fiction. The founder was still sincere. He still wanted humans on Mars. But he had just admitted, out loud, that the timeline millions of people believed in was not real. The science was finished. The money was next. Chapter 6, the show that never aired. Remember, the entire plan to pay for Mars rested on one thing, the greatest reality show ever made. And in June 2014, it looked real. Mars One signed a production company owned by Endemol, the studio behind Big Brother, to film the astronaut selection and training. The most watched event in history finally had a broadcaster. And then, in February 2015, it collapsed. The two sides could never agree on a contract. Not a single frame was ever filmed. The funding model walked out the door. Mars One tried to salvage it. Instead of a live global show, it would make its own short films. But a handful of web videos is not the Olympics. The money engine was gone, and it never came back. With the reality show gone, Mars One needed a new way to look like a real business. So in 2016, it did something clever and hollow. It went public on a stock exchange. Not through a normal listing, through a reverse takeover of a dormant Swiss shell company called Infin, a former mobile payments firm that had gone quiet. On paper, the deal valued Mars One at 87 million euros. Infin was a dormant former mobile payments firm. After the merger, the old Mars One owners kept 97% of the new stock. They had not really raised money. They had merged a dream into an empty shell and called it public. But paper is not cash. When the shares actually started trading in Frankfurt, they opened at 16 euro cents. The real market value of the company that promised to colonize Mars was under 3 million euros. Follow the actual money, and it was tiny. Donations and merchandise, by Mars One's own count, came to under $1 million. A crowdfunding campaign raised about 300,000 more, against a mission that needed 6 billion. And the structure underneath was stranger than it looked. There were two Mars Ones, a Dutch non-profit that owned the mission, and a for-profit that owned the money. The for-profit promised the mission just 5 cents of every dollar it earned. Follow that math to the end. To fund a €6 billion mission on a 5% cut, the company would have had to earn €120 billion, more than almost any media franchise in history. The business model was quietly impossible from the start. By independent accounts, the company was running on almost nothing and had been in debt for years, according to Dutch filings. Its own chief medical officer said, plainly, that he had no clue what the finances at all were. And the money that did come in? By Mars One's own accounting, most of it went to concept studies, travel, and marketing. Its critics had a blunter version. It went into videos, not a spaceship. And the deadlines kept sliding. The first landing moved from 2023 to 2025 to 2027, and finally to 2031. Always just far enough away to keep believing. No rocket was ever built. No robotic probe ever flew. The colony existed only in press releases and beautifully rendered concept art. And then, very quietly, it ended. Chapter 7. A Quiet Bankruptcy. There was no press conference, no apology to the 200,000, no message to the 100 finalists who had told their families they were leaving Earth. On the 15th of January, 2019, at 3:37 in the afternoon, a civil court in Basel, Switzerland, declared the company bankrupt. The dream had a time of death. The for-profit arm that was supposed to raise billions had debts of roughly €1 million. And in its accounts, according to reporting, less than $25,000. Less than the price of a car. Sit with the size of that gap. A company that once said it would spend $6 billion and earn tens of billions more had ended with about €1 million in debt and almost nothing in the bank. The distance between the promise and the reality was the entire story. And the strangest detail of all, almost nobody noticed. For nearly a month, the death of Mars One sat unread in a Swiss court register. The world only found out in February when an anonymous user on Reddit stumbled across the filing and posted a link. That is how the mission to colonize Mars ended, as a link on a message board. For the 100 finalists, there was no letter. Many of them learned that the mission they had rebuilt their whole lives around was dead the same way the rest of the world did, from a news story. Bas Lansdorp says the non-profit foundation still legally exists, that it is only stalled, that he is still looking for an investor. As of today, no one has ever gone to Mars with Mars One. No one ever will. And let us be precise about what this was and what it was not. Mars One went bankrupt. That is insolvency. It is not a court finding a fraud. Bas Lansdorp was never charged with a crime. Critics called it a scam, a money grab, the fake mission that fooled the world. But those are their words, not a verdict. The truth sits in a harder, grayer place. So what do we do with a story like this? Because here is what stays with me. It is not the missing money. It is not even the physics. It is how badly people wanted to go. 200,000 of them raised their hands to leave everything they had ever known, forever, to stand on red dirt under a small, cold sun. Some of them had already begun to let go. Sonja van Meter's family had started, gently, to picture a life without her. That is what a ticket like this really costs. Not just money, years of a real person's hope. Joseph Roche never wanted revenge. He said his nightmare was simply that people would keep giving their money and their hope to something that would, in his words, inevitably fall on its face. In 2019, it did. Most of the 100 quietly moved on. Some kept working toward Mars, on real missions, with real agencies. The longing did not die with the company. It just needed an honest vehicle. The dream of Mars was real. The longing was real. It was only the ticket that was fake. And maybe the most human thing in this whole story is how many of us wanted to believe the ticket was real anyway. If a mission that never left the ground can pull in 200,000 people, wait until you see what happened to the astronauts who actually flew and never came home. Watch our film on the 21 astronauts who died reaching for space. If this story moved you, subscribe to Mindwired. We tell the true stories of how far people will go to touch the stars and what it costs them. This has been Mars One. If any of this messed with your head a little, well, that's exactly the point. And it only happens because people like you keep showing up. And
hit subscribe right now for it. It costs you nothing, and it's the entire reason Mindwired keeps making videos like this. Subscribe.